Hi, everyone. So my name is Michelle Kay, and I'm a writer and editor, as well as a runner and cyclist in Toronto. I'm a co-captain of Parkdale Roadrunners, and I'll be moderating tonight's discussion. So thanks so much for joining us. As people are trickling in, I'm going to go over some housekeeping. We'll have some time at the end for a Q&A, so if you have any questions, please drop them into the comments. And thanks to Kelly from CRS, who will be monitoring the chat. This conversation will be recorded. So before we begin, we'd like to recognize that this event was organized in Toronto. It is the traditional territory of many nations, including the Anishinaabe, the Haudenosaunee, the Huron-Wendat, and Petun First Nations, the Seneca, and the Mississaugas of the Credit River. This territory is the subject of the One Dish, One Spoon Wampum Belt Covenant, an agreement between the Iroquois Confederacy and Confederacy of the Ojibwe and allied nations to peaceably share and care for the resources around the Great Lakes. It has always been and still is home to many First Nations, Inuit, and Métis peoples. As settlers on this land, we are constantly striving to be better allies with the Indigenous peoples of Turtle Island. If you're tuning in from somewhere else, we'd like to invite you to reflect on where you are located, who the traditional keepers of the land are, and what the treaty relationship is, or whether you are on unceded territory. We're grateful for this land where we live, work, play, and run. We're also grateful for the people who care for and defend this land. We're thankful we're able to come together digitally to share space and talk about running and inclusion, but we also need to recognize the ways Indigenous, Black, and POC communities have been impacted by colonization, disposition, displacement, and forced migration. We ask that you also reflect on this throughout the evening. And please note that this is an anti-racist and anti-oppressive space. Any bigoted comments will not be tolerated. And once again, this conversation will be recorded. So let's get into it. Tonight's panelists are Melanie Murzeau. Melanie is a runner and working mom of 3 girls. She is the Toronto run lead for Project Love Run, a running collective for all self-identified women seeking a safe space to connect with others and their own minds and bodies. They host a monthly run to brunch and discussion. Melanie also created Black Runners of the GTA on Instagram and organized tonight's panel with Canadian Running Series. Quinton Jacobs is a dad, a runner, a Lululemon ambassador, a super volunteer, and mentor. He's the co-founder of Escape to New York, program director at Start to Finish, a run coach for Kickback Connect, and founder of Lead Up Crew. Then we have Melissa Doldron. Melissa is a registered massage therapist, movement educator, and breath work facilitator. She focuses on blending movement and recovery, as well as connecting to the community through sport and advocacy. And we have Ekua Cudjoe, who was born and raised in Toronto. She began her athletic journey at a young age, participating in parks and recreation programs, school teams, and sport clubs. This former captain and nationally ranked thrower of the University of Toronto track and field team is using her experiences to create Soleful Runs, a space for members of the Black community to enjoy recreational running and walking as a collective. So welcome to everybody. So let's kick it off with the literal title of our panel. What does inclusion in running mean to you? And maybe Melanie, you want to start since you had the idea to organize this panel and bring everybody together.
Yes. So I opened up this question to the community on Black Runners of the GTA. I had an open-ended question, and I just wanted to ask what inclusion means to them. I know Canada Running Series did as well, and the overarching response was it's creating a sense of belonging and being welcome in this space. I know when I was going through research, the Air Up There Run crew had a story that they tweeted by Namari Islam Nani, that helps me when I came up with this idea of concept of inclusion. And it also helps me in my work as well, on the board for diversity and inclusion at my workplace. So it was diversity is who's in the room, inclusion is who influences the room, who has the power, and I added accessibility is who has the ability to access the room. And the overarching thing is that everyone in the room has an anti-racism mindset and a way of being the goal. That's the goal of the whole entire room. So these concepts are not interchangeable. When it comes to inclusion, I usually people focus on diversity. you want a face, you just want one person in the room who represents a BIPOC individual. But going into inclusion, you want to know who influences the room. Who are you asking in the room when you make these changes, when you bring up these ideas? And the reason why I felt that this panel was needed for the community is you go to the community who you're trying to influence, who has the power, influential power, who's making changes, and ask them, how do they see the community, and open it up to everyone in the community to ask how they want to see change. So I felt that this panel was needed. When you make policies or when you make any sort of goal or objective, you want to make sure that you ask the people who it impacts. Now, of course, the overarching theme of inclusion also includes age, race, gender identity, sexuality, as well as women, safety, ability, neurodivergent, parents, religion. There's a whole bunch of overarching things that affect people's running journeys and have their own specific barriers. But for this particular discussion, it's mostly BIPOC focus. So we couldn't really go to all the other ones, but it would, like, I think when we had a conversation, Michelle, we said that that would require like a series to talk about all those different groups. Like, I just felt we did the best of trying to get the BIPOC community and asking influential people, as well as leaving it open it to the community. So I just wanted to get everyone's perspective. I felt like I talked a long time.
Does anybody else want to, I mean, this is 90 minutes. We're not going to be able to get through as much as we can. So again, maybe this is the beginning of a series, but does anybody else want to jump in?
I think Melanie nailed it. Oh, sorry.
Oh, sorry. Yeah, no, I just would add one more thing as Melanie highlighted all those things there. It's truly that sentiment of being able to show up as your authentic self without judgment and whatever that surrounding might look like. So I know we spoke to different places and all those different identifiers that may, some people may feel that identifier prevents them from being in a space. And so even looking at inclusion, whether it is on a small scale for a social aspect, for example, showing it to a group, or being able to step into a larger environment, it's, do I feel safe or do I feel comfortable just simply be myself? I don't have to alter how I show up to be able to be accepted. So absolutely, I love what you shared there as well, Melanie.
Okay, so thank you for that. Let's talk about the running community. So both Melissa and Quinton have been involved for a long time, and I'm curious what you have noticed that have changed, some things that have changed, or what hasn't changed over time.
Take it away, Q.
I was gonna let you go first, Mo.
All right. So I'd say personally, I've probably been an active member of the Toronto Run community for the last maybe 9 or 10 years. So I've definitely seen a lot of changes and shifts and running with different groups. I think some of the biggest changes has been just education and awareness to the fact that there needs, that we're all just sort of evolving humans. And where I may have started in the run community was simply for me, a space of getting exercise. I was a student at the time and just had no money and was like, oh, there's free run clubs that I can just show up and run. Cool. To then utilizing running as many groups and crews do, using running for larger purposes. I think you see a huge shift now in community activism and advocacy, raising money for charitable organizations. So yeah, I'd say in that sense, and then just seeing little subsets, run crews that are, as we're speaking of inclusion, finding that maybe they didn't see themselves, so they're building what they want to see. And I think that's been a huge shift, because when I first started, you know, you'd go to the running room, and I started at the very sort of beginning of when Nike had run clubs around the city, and it's just kind of and it exploded, I'd say, the last 5 or 6 years, all over into just other ways and other groups. But yeah, I think that's the biggest change, is just seeing people who want to have their own community, whether they're a marginalized group or a racialized group, or just whatever, a group in the burbs that just want to run with other people that live in their neighborhood. You're seeing people come together more, definitely more access if you seek that out.
I agree with Melissa. I've definitely over the years seen running as a sport, people exploring the diversity of the sport. There was a time when like people would run, they wanted to run PBs, they wanted to qualify for Boston or run their fastest race. And that seemed to be like the only language that people would speak when they were talking about running. And now it's so beautiful to hear people running also for the athletic component, but for mental health, for a connection with nature, for social activism, like Melissa said, raising money for the community. Like there's so many different things, and it's so great to see the sport just sort of explode in that way, because ultimately that just opens the door for diversity in the long run.
So
Yeah.
speaking of diversity, this next question is for Melanie and Ekua. So you both started projects that celebrate and focus on Black athletes. And Melanie, maybe you can talk about what your reasons were for starting Black Runners of the GTA.
Okay, I'll try to keep it brief. So I started Black Runners of the GTA, and it's twofold. It's representation. I wanted positive representation, that people would be able to see themselves. I found it very hard to find people of color to look for people of color, or to look for people who look like me on just like a Google search on Instagram, or where do I look for a run crew and I'm in Scarborough, where do I find someone that I can relate to? Where can I find someone who looks like me, knowing that as a solo runner that I can identify with? And then the vision was, because I am a solo runner, how can I get immersed into the run community? So I wanted a place. I first started off with Black runners only, but then I opened it up to BIPOC runners, because they feel the same thing in group settings as well. And also, if you're a solo runner, if you're out on the burbs and you're trying to connect with other people, where do you find community, right? If you're not in the downtown core, who do you run with? So that's the inspiration, or the reason why I started Black Runners of the GTA. And then I did a couple of research. So research after I started it, there was also Diverse We Run, which is by Carol Sue, which is awesome. And I saw that, and I wanted to take a little bit of that. I saw the video from Allison Dayshire, which was amazing. And Sabrina Pace Humphreys, which is amazing too. So all these women were looking for community, and I really feel like they should get all their flowers, because in the sense that they inspired me to find my own voice in being able to think that I can do something like this as an outsider, as I felt, to start something like that. But yeah, I had to do a lot of research, even to find Soleful Runs, just to find that, or the Air Up There run crew, just different places, like just to find a home that we could just find community.
I think that now that you've found them and that we're like talking about it, it's just going to be easier for everybody to connect. Ekua, do you want to talk about Soulful Runs and why you started it?
Yeah, so as Melanie had mentioned, that research has been something that it was trying to find a community, as I mentioned before, you can show up and be your authentic self. And so for myself as well, coming out of university and being on a team and feeling that place where I can just show up and, you know, I had my friends, I had that environment, and I just enjoyed the sport and I enjoyed the people around me. And then trying to find that now in run spaces. And so I knew that throughout the city, I always see people talking about how great they love the run community, the benefits of it, you know, even just seeing on Instagram and seeing people, you know, finishing their run and having that community aspect. And so going throughout and looking at places where I just didn't see myself, literally not really seeing many other Black women, but then also just at times showing up to spaces. And if I didn't really align to what maybe the goals or how that community was set up to be, I didn't feel like I could show up to be myself. For example, coming out as being as an athlete, and many people expected me to perform or be fast or to do certain things, and I was just showing up just to run and meet new people. So it kind of came to that point where I didn't want to keep looking for something where I fit in. I decided to take a step back and actually create something that didn't exist, which was a way to actually provide a space for Black athletes to be able to show up and just enjoy it without an expectation to perform at a certain level. I believe within the running space that a lot of times we see Black athletes only on that pinnacle level where they're competing in the Olympics, but anything lesser than that, really, they're not really showcased in that perspective. And so I want to have a space, and that's why as well, it's not just for runners, but also walkers, because I decided to take a step back and said, I understand my experience, but I want to also understand the experience of other Black runners who are trying to be in the sport, either starting new or having that experience. And so from hearing from folks within my community and like listening to people, for example, my sister, she loves sports and she loves participating in activities, but a lot of times for her, it might be difficult for her to step into a space if she doesn't know if she's fit enough and she can keep up with others. And so we decided to actually take a different approach on how we actually create that space. So you can just show up, of course, you connect with people who look like you, who understand the experience that you have as well, but then be able to just simply move together and have that great elements of community, to be able to unite, to have conversations and get to know one another. And so within that space itself, we really love to have it where we focus on that community element. The name Soleful Run itself, it's absolutely a play on words. I know there's always a red squiggly line under soulful when you type it in, but it's a play on words of both movement, of the movement of the foot, for example, movement through running, but soul as also the individual. So our group is always evolving to understand the needs of the individual. So for example, showing up and introducing yourself and getting to know someone's names and their pronouns, asking them questions on their run about how they're doing that day, really just focus on having that experience so you can really fully enjoy that community element and having that movement together.
And so in pre-COVID times, you were meeting on Tuesdays, right?
Yeah, so we did Tuesdays. I remember our very first run was actually the day after the first Black Mental Health Day. It was wonderful. And so we met on Tuesdays. When restrictions opened up a little bit more, we added a couple other locations throughout the city to really be able to connect with meaningful locations. So for example, in Weston, which has a larger Black population there as well, down by Lakeshore at the Jean Augustine Park, of course, to honor her, and then within the annex by Bathurst and Bloor, which is historically a Black neighborhood, and to connect with a Black book-owned store there as well, a different book list.
Mm-hmm. So that leads nicely into this next question I had about safe spaces, and this is for anybody to jump in. How can we create safe spaces for BIPOC and marginalized runners to be with one another?
I'd love to jump in there. I think we need to talk about what even that word safe space means, and like to have a conversation to say more like safer space, because I don't really think, everyone has their own experience and what they've gone through. So I truly don't believe there's like safe space for all. We can make it as safe as possible. And how do we make things safer for folks to show up? And I just think it comes back to leadership. Wherever you are, like if you are a run leader or a race organizer, what have you, it comes down to what is your sort of purpose, what are your mandates, how, looking out at who your runners are, who the people are that show up, how are you thoughtfully trying to make sure that it's a comfortable space? What does your language look like? Like I said, like everything, we're always going to be constantly learning and evolving. And I'm sure we've all said and done things that made someone feel uncomfortable unintentionally. So it's always just about learning and growing and being open and honest with your communication, saying that if there's something that happens, please come to us so that we can learn and grow together. But I do think it starts with leadership. So if you're a leader of a run crew or a running group, if you're a coach, what kind of work are you doing to learn about how to create those safer spaces? Are you actually talking to your runners about this, having meetings? Maybe it's having anonymous surveys. So if people don't want to have the face-to-face conversation, they can like submit something anonymously, just to say, hey, this is what's been happening, or these are phrases or words you've said. Maybe you could, think about it from a different perspective. And then seek out experts when you need it. If you don't know, find someone who does, and hopefully pay them for their knowledge.
Those are great tips. Does anybody else want to jump in on this?
Yeah, I think Melissa said everything that I was going to say. But paying people for their knowledge. If you don't know and you don't see anyone that represents the community that you're trying to reach within your own organization or within your own run crew, maybe it might be something that you want to get some training in, whether you have like an anti-racism mindset within the group and the organization, and just getting like a little bit of more knowledge on how to be anti-racist if that might be an issue within your run group. Sorry.
What I would add is, as well as looking at it, not only just saying that everyone is welcome, but we create it with you in mind. So understanding what that, just because sometimes we don't know how someone might experience something that's different for us. So taking that time to like take a step back and learn and say, it's not just you can show up to my party and you don't like the food, you don't like the music, and it's like, well, I invited you. It's like, no, I took the time to understand how I can make sure you can also enjoy this experience the same way that I do. But also being open to know that not everyone has answers, but being willing to learn.
Absolutely. And I do think sometimes I see this, or I've been learning this with the classes, movement classes that I teach, is that it's also okay in a sense of like, you cannot please everybody. You can do your best, but maybe you do need to have parameters saying, okay, if this is a group I'm just going to use running pace as the example. This is a group that is going to be from like a 5 minute a kilometer to a 6 minute a kilometer, be intentional and say, this is who this is for, because then you don't want to make someone who maybe runs at a 7 minute, or maybe someone who's even faster and shows up and is like, oh, now I got to slow down. You don't want to purposely exclude, but like, if you're intentional saying, these are the things you'll need to do in order to be a part of this group, that also just creates, make sure that there isn't friction with someone showing up and then, being disappointed or feeling bad, but when it wasn't, on purpose.
Yeah, and just to build up on that, being intentional of what your run crew is for. If it's for speed or for the different pace, is it being mindful? Is it for everyone's welcome? It's an inclusive environment, just communicating that out. And if you do get anti-racism training, maybe also say this is a safe space and everyone has been trued up on anti-racism training.
Totally.
So let's talk about accessibility. People like to say that running is accessible to everyone, that all you need is a pair of running shoes and away you go, but there's so much more to that. There are all kinds of barriers to participation. What do you think are some of the greatest barriers, and perhaps what are some ways of addressing these barriers to make the sport more accessible?
I could speak to that, or at least kick it off. I tend to think of barriers in two ways. I think of sort of external and internal barriers. External barriers would be, I can't financially afford to play tennis or to run. I don't have the gear, or there's no club that I'm not invited to that club, or I'm not welcome to that club. It doesn't exist. Internal barriers would be, I don't see anyone like me in that space. And because of that, I'm not going to take the first steps in exploring that space. And of course, like this type of internal dialogue isn't limited to running, right? It could be, I'm too big, I'm not fast, so I can't go there, I don't see myself there. Or my favorite, I'm not a runner, right? But you're wearing running shoes and you're out running. So personally, I see these kinds of internal barriers as having a huge impact on people's participation, just not seeing themselves reflected in a lot of spaces. And so one of the best ways that I think we can address that is to celebrate the trailblazers, like celebrate the people who've had the courage to go out there and to jump into these spaces or create spaces. Melanie, Melissa, Ekua, like 3 people that have created spaces and made a space for other people to sort of follow and to fall into. Andre Morgan, you know, when I learned about trail running, there were no Black faces in trail running. And you know, and here's someone who's just out there doing it. You know, Migs and the Me versus Me movement. Like there's people out there who are doing really cool things and creating spaces for people to sort of see themselves so they can take those steps.
Yeah.
And just to piggyback off of that, just find a place, a community aspect where you can find those groups, right? I think Me versus Me, the movement, that was the first runner actually featured. And I don't know how many people were aware, or the community was aware, that that run crew actually existed or was out there without like a deep search, again, on Instagram. So just wanted to say that representation is really important.
Yeah, and everything, yeah, exposure, I think, is for some of those internal barriers can be really key. And I do think sometimes it's tough depending on what people's even people's access on social media is, if they're not using it even. But for like broader scale, you know, media folks, that's sort of that first line is like, if you can see it, then you can, you know, see something that represents you or is reflective of you, then you can kind of say, oh, okay, well, if they're doing it, then I can do it. But it also comes back to, and I don't know, we might discuss it a little deeper, but of just things like mentorship and coaching. I think, especially in distance running, it's such an issue. Like, how many Black coaches are in Toronto? I think one Black distance coach that I know of, and I'm always checking and I'm always looking because I always get people asking me if I know any. And it's just, yeah, if you want to be coached, you know, some people aren't looking for that, but that also, you know, helps create a community. Is if someone is a coach, they're out seeking runners, and then their runners will tell runners. And so I think often for members of BIPOC community, that's a big issue.
I would add to that, you know, in many ways, you're talking about accessibility and seeing yourself and creating those spaces. And a lot of times, I think I would encourage many people, even the audience listening, is to invite others to create if they feel that they want to take that on, if they have the bandwidth to do so. Example, I've had people who've asked me to, you know, host a Soleful Run session in London, and they're like, I don't have the bandwidth to do that. But if you want to look at how we're doing our runs and what you'd like to do, and you want to bring that to your community, please go ahead and do so. I think sometimes it comes a lot where things are created, and many times, you know, we all can be this way where you want to make sure you have the greatest thing. You want everyone to come to it. But a lot of times it's even greater when we have a bigger impact by expanding those experiences out to many other people. So I would also encourage others to empower your next person, be like, hey, you know, I see that you're looking for this. How can we help you bring that to your community? Even coaches, like you may see athletes and current coaches say, I see someone who would be an amazing coach. Maybe I can mentor them to be that next coach. So we do have more diversity in this field.
Yes.
Because sharing that access, and I think that's a huge thing as well. It's like, how do we now go beyond versus granting access to individuals to granting access to communities?
Absolutely. And I think it comes back to something I see a lot in sort of mindfulness and sort of sports psychology when we're thinking about like an abundance mindset. I think sometimes with, I mean, a lot of industries, but coaching, teaching, it's like you have your people and you want to keep all that information to yourself. And then you're the only one who's going to have it then, and your community won't grow. So yeah, I think mentorship and offering, you know, don't deplete yourself, but yeah, start asking other members of the community, would you be interested in this? I'll help you. I'll guide you. I'll do what I can, and share your knowledge, share that wealth so that they can then flourish and create something cool with people they know and runners they know. Yeah.
I do want to click on one other element when we talk about access, and it does come in line with, you know, speaking about support and growing, but also support when we look at the community as a whole. I think that is also a barrier at times, and it kind of looks over into solo running, where it's that support sometimes from the community, even when you're taking things on your own. So thinking about, for example, I'm going to speak particularly for the Black experience. A lot of times running solo is not accessible because you may not feel safe to do so wherever you're going without the cities. You know, unfortunately, seeing Black runners at times may not be something that someone is accustomed to, and so thinks that it's not okay or it's not right. So that's one thing that I know, for example, with Melanie's Black Runner, the GTA, and same thing I really have that's I'm really trying to drive is that normalization of Black running. So a lot of times thinking about, you know, yeah, you can say, grab a pair of shoes, go outside and run. That might be accessible to some people to do so because they feel safe to do so. So I think even looking at how do we support one another to encourage each other and say, how can I help you get to that point so you feel comfortable, you feel confident, and have access to the sport in many different environments. So one thing that's fun that I try to do when I go on solo runs, I tend to run with my hands like this, so I'll give a thumbs up to someone that I see passing. But we can start thinking about like what are ways that we can support one another wherever we're seeing another runner.
Yeah, that's an excellent point. So Melissa had mentioned mentorship, and I wanted to ask Quinton about that, since you're someone who's done a lot of volunteering and the behind the scenes work, as well as fundraising and creating programs and mentorships for youth. Do you want to talk about some of your projects and the role that mentorship can play in inclusion?
For sure, for sure. I mean, well, before you can have inclusion, you first need to have exposure, right? Especially for young people, and especially for young people in marginalized communities. So, I mean, CRS could give me 20 bibs to a race this fall, and I wouldn't be able to give them away right now because there's a step in between. And that's the step where we introduce young people to running. We introduce them to the sport. We introduce them to the beauty of running, all the things that we're passionate as runners about, all the benefits. And that's the step where mentorship programs like Start to Finish, mentorship programs like the Kickback, Lead Up, Patchwork, that's the step that these programs are working on. And that's really, to me, and what I've seen in my experience working in these spaces is just the first step in opening up the doors, not just to running, but to the world. And so I invite people that are interested in contributing to diversifying running to look at mentorship and the importance of it in these programs, to opening up doors for young people.
Do you want to talk a little bit about volunteering and sort of like, you know?
Yeah. For sure. I mean, obviously with COVID, a lot of programs have had to pivot. Some have stopped. Many have found creative ways to continue. Start to Finish, which is a program that I've been with for, I want to say 8 years now. I'm a program director with Spruce Court in Regent Park, and they've taken their program online. And so it's a running and reading program for at-risk youth. They've got hubs all over, I think more than 50 different locations across the GTA. And so we meet with these kids online twice a week for half an hour, and we're doing sort of a physical activity portion and also a literacy. And they've also added through this difficult year a social, emotional component that to the curriculum that we share with these kids. And it's really all, I mean, all of the curriculum is great, but really just seeing that these kids are showing up online. Like, I thought there's no way kids are going to show up. They've got enough online space. I'm going to log in and there's going to be no one there. And sure enough, you know, week after week, kids are showing up, and they're all taking something different. They're all showing up for different reasons, but there's value there, or they wouldn't be there. It's a free online program after school. But it's encouraging to know that the space is still needed, and I'd argue needed even more now. The Kickback, they kicked off a running program several years ago, and they're continuing to pivot and just use their community to introduce running to young people. And we, you know, in years past, watched them do the young people who hadn't run 2K before run the Scotiabank half marathon. You know, the twins were this, they were 7 at the time, and it just, you know, chipped away over the summer, little by little. So yeah, there's a lot of different mentorship programs, and you need not look far. You can reach out to me if you're interested in the different programs that are out there, and I can point you in the right direction for sure.
Yeah, I just want to remind people that we will be sending out an email, a follow-up email afterwards with some resources and the ways that you can connect with our panelists. So yeah, just look out for that. So I do want to switch the focus a little bit and move beyond representation and look at some of the ways that running can be used for justice. Ekua, you were able to use Soleful Runs to mobilize people to push for August 1st to be recognized as Emancipation Day in Canada. Can you speak about that?
Yeah, of course. That time with the Soleful Runs community, as mentioned, we're always evolving, but in that moment itself, we realized that we really wanted to hear what the community needed. And during the summertime, it was a lot. It was a heavy summer. And so for the Black community, we've been, taking in the events that had happened, seeing that impact on themselves, and needing a space to be able to connect with one another. And so I found that during that time, learning about Black history was not accessible for Black Canadians in general. And so trying to have those conversations in our space in our community, I realized I had an opportunity to be able just to share the knowledge that I had with more people. Fortunately for myself, my mom is an educator. And so growing up, she had always made the initiative to take me to different exhibits and share books that allow me to learn more about Black Canadian history, but that's actually not included into our curriculums in school. And so anytime it came around talking about Emancipation Day and the August long weekend, that we call it a civic holiday up to this point, many people always thought about the events that you see, for example, Caravana or the Toronto Caribbean Festival, OVO weekend, Veld. That was kind of always like the thought for that weekend. And so when it was coming around again, and of course those things were canceled, I looked at the community, I'm like, we do have great things to celebrate. We have Emancipation Day to celebrate. And because I realized that many people within my own small circle didn't know about the day, I said, let's take this moment to go further and start to share. So I decided to create a petition with change.org. And the main purpose, I had no idea where it was going to go. I'm like, let me just create a petition and see what happens. But embedded with that, I decided to share a lot of resources so folks can learn about Black Canadian history. And then it kind of just continued from there. So we had over 4,000 people who signed that petition. And then it led into, of course, other work that was already happening. But for our MPs to see the amount of energy and the amount that was coming from the community to see how important that was, that really helped influence that vote. For there was a unanimous vote across all of the MPs to actually pass it, so that this year, Emancipation Day on August 1st be recognized across the entire country. And so it was super amazing. And I was very fortunate to also be a part of those conversations to discuss with some of our MPs on that moment, but something where felt so great to be able to amplify the voices of the community. And in that moment itself, being able to show up and to be proud as a Black Canadian, to be able to have a moment where understand history. I know that we see, of course, for the Black community in Canada and of course the Indigenous community, there has been erasure of history that is not being shared from generation to generation. So to have that moment where runners can move, to be able to move together and see that day. And of course, as a community, last summer, we actually I ran my first half marathon on that day. I trained up to that moment. And so seeing people, for example, run their first 10K or half marathon, or even their first 5K, and we were able to move together. So we had about 30 runners who came together. We started at Jean Augustine's Park. Of course, we did that on purpose because she was the one who passed Black History Month in Canada during her time as an MP. So we purposely went to that moment to be able to celebrate her, celebrate Emancipation Day, and celebrate our community as a whole. So we will definitely be doing that again this year, to be able to unite and to move together, whether it's virtually in person, but we are absolutely going to celebrate that moment and continue to see how we can drive, of course, that social justice, but having that conversation to celebrate communities within Canada.
Mm-hmm. Does anybody else have anything they want to add?
That was very good. You deserve your flowers for that. That was amazing. And if you haven't heard it enough, thank you and awesome. But what you were saying about the erasure of history is true. Black Runners of the GTA, it's not social justice, but it's just something that I wanted to highlight, was that the Canadian history Black Canadian history has evaporated, or it hasn't even existed. And for the month of February, I decided to focus on Black Canadian runners throughout history and just make it known, and also make it known about the treatment of. And the reason why I'm bringing this up is because I actually got an opportunity to interview Valerie Jerome, which was an awesome opportunity. And that's coming out on Women's Run podcast, but Women's Run Canada podcast. And I just want other people to take notice of her story as well. And it's something to look forward and to listen to, and just to get understanding of Canadian history from a Black woman's perspective.
Just for clarification and for people who might not know, could you just tell us who she is?
Yeah, sorry. So Valerie Jerome is the sister of Harry Jerome, who is a Black Canadian runner from the 60s. He actually was marked the fastest man on earth at the time. He actually got the world record that he ran the 100-meter distance. And his sister was also a very known athlete as well at that time, but you would be at loss to search or know who they are, especially with the younger generation or with my kids or anyone of that they wouldn't know about Harry Jerome in Vancouver. Oh, there is a statue of Harry Jerome in Vancouver Stanley Park, which is true. And she does speak to that in the podcast as well. And her story is fascinating. And I feel like in history, we overlook a lot of the times Black women's stories, and her story is valid and holds space, and it's something to listen to.
Yeah. Melissa, did you have something you wanted to add?
Yeah, just on the topic of justice, I just say this is where I've found in the last few years how powerful social media can be, and where I see runners mobilizing for different issues, causes, and efforts. Even most recently, something you've been involved in with Chinatown runners, after all the things that have been happening this year with anti-Asian hate, and being able to connect with a runner based out of New York who was putting together runs to help promote, or not promote, but to help promote the idea of stopping that anti-Asian racism that's been sweeping across the world, and now connecting to being able through social media, her posting about what she's doing to connect with other cities and run crews, and you taking up that mantle in Toronto, and we've had 2 runs here. So that's like a really great way that runners are able to get involved. And the same thing, it comes back to educating, awareness, and then bringing forth some kind of advocacy or activism for a cause. So I do think, we see it a lot in a very small sense. It's using that same idea that you'd see for running for like charity and raising money or awareness for a cause, but this time now it's for issues of justice, and it's been done for a few years now with different causes that I've seen anyway, and it's always, I find, a powerful tool and method.
Yeah, for me with organizing Chinatown runners, it was an issue of erasure. And I think that both Melanie and Ekua talked about this, of certain aspects of our history being invisible or erased, or in like often the case with Chinatown, gentrification, facing these very real disappearing neighborhoods. So it was important for me to like include that, and for people to learn the history of the people that were there and the diaspora and all of that. So yeah. Okay, so let's switch it up again and talk about, as we're talking about this country and erasure, we can't talk about it without addressing our colonial history and the fact that we are settlers on Indigenous land. So I'm wondering if folks have any ideas on how to acknowledge and reflect on this, be it in terms of races or events, or, even just going on your own runs. Like, what are some things that maybe people can think about?
Well, as you kicked off the conversation, I think, the land acknowledgement is definitely very key. And as we talked about before, always being open to learning. So I know that we have where when we speak to land acknowledgements and a lot of times erasure, we address communities, a lot of times we just say Indigenous as a whole, but we don't take a time to actually understand the diversity within the community. So within land acknowledgement is a way for us to be able to learn about those who are protecting land and who are really investing into future generations. And I am not Indigenous, but I want to make the effort to be able to learn more and how I can actually, with my run community, make sure that as we are exploring Black history in Canada, that we're also acknowledging Indigenous histories and where we are actually going through different spaces. So within that space as well, it's like, how do we actually do those things, but then again, hold ourselves accountable. So if we are deciding to do that for myself, like I want to look into, of course, offering that land acknowledgement to my community and make sure I hold myself accountable, that I continue to include that and share that with folks as well. So I think it's twofold, like taking that step to learn, but then also making sure that we hold each other accountable, that we're making that effort to make a difference.
And just to piggyback off what Ekua said, which was a very good point, is that I'm looking at inclusion as well and who holds influence in the room. And in this instance, I'm not Indigenous, and in order to speak on the communities that you mentioned, I think it was 4 communities within Toronto. I think if you're going to have a land acknowledgement before a race, it might be key and instrumental to go out and reach out to those communities and how they would like to see the land acknowledgement to reflect their community, and also pay them for their services, for consulting on their work, and how they want the land acknowledgement to reflect their community.
I would also add, sorry, I would also just add to hire them maybe to be a race director or to be part of the team.
That's true. So they can have a seat at the table.
Yeah.
Yeah, the only thing I would add again is, you know, we touched on it earlier about just research that you'll do, ways to educate, is just, again, for most of us who are on and utilize various social media platforms, is looking up what communities, run groups, events might be happening, and maybe not in your area, but either in your province or in the country. There are a ton of Indigenous and Native peoples events throughout North America that I follow on via Instagram. And so anytime I see, especially this year with virtual, if I see an event that's virtual, that's either maybe raising money for their community or something, I just do the simple thing. I'll either pay money, sign up for their virtual event, and then I share it with my friends. I share it with my little running group chat. I'll post it, you know, share it on Instagram. That's like a simple, like the baseline kind of thing you can do, is just when you see other events, when you see runners maybe doing incredible things in their community, or using running for something, for a larger purpose, is just to share that, find those stories and share them. And then if you are in a position where you have influence, that's where you can bring that inclusion, that you're hiring people, maybe consulting with them around either events, organizations. Maybe you're in a position where you can have people come and do a chat about what they're doing, pay them to be a speaker.
So this leads nicely into my next question, which is, what are some tangible actions that run captains, crews, race organizers can do to operate from an anti-racist and anti-oppressive framework?
I was going to, Michelle, just quickly jump onto what Melissa said, because it resonated with me, and probably transitions into this next question. And it's just about, like, diversity to me isn't always something that you can mandate, right? It's not about just inviting different people. Doing a land acknowledgement is great, but like just checking off boxes is one thing. To me, genuine diversity and inclusion is about celebrating people's differences. And so Melissa's talking about, like, if you see something that's cool, interesting, exciting, beautiful that someone's doing, share it. And like, that's how we get to celebrate people's differences. And to me, there's an obvious difference between the two, right? Genuine, you know, inclusion and diversity, celebrating people's differences, it hits different. And so you can tell the difference between just checking a box and actually leaning into the beauty of community. So that was, like, I guess Momo already answered one tangible thing that you can do.
I'll go back. I mean, I think this is going to be a recurring theme is if you are a run crew leader or a race director organizer, is the simple thing is find someone who works in anti-racism, anti-oppression, like a facilitator, a diversity, equity, inclusion facilitator. Hire them to teach you, hire them to maybe take a look at how your organization is run, find ways you can, as people have been, as the kids are saying these days, pass the mic. If there's a way, maybe you can't hire people full-time right now, but you can do consulting, hire someone to come in and work a specific event. Maybe it's not your whole race series, but especially if you're a run crew leader and that is something that is important to you, just take a workshop, take a course for yourself. So that way you can start viewing how you're running things from that anti-racism, anti-oppressive lens. Yeah, and I just think the more people in levels of access and influence, the more you can actually use that to then hire Black, Indigenous, people of color to do specific jobs from, comes from within. People will talk about this from a corporate level, but it works across the board. Who are you hiring for specific roles, for specific events? You can switch it up. It doesn't have to be the same thing all the time. Share the wealth. And then that way they get some exposure, they get paid, they get some experience. It can move on to other communities, to other events.
Exactly. And it comes from an authentic place.
I think a key thing, something like a tactic you can do as well, something tangible, it goes a little bit deeper, but acknowledging our biases. So we all, as humans, we will have unconscious bias in how we group. For example, our friends will most likely be like us. And so when we have run communities, a lot of times it starts off as inviting friends, which are people who are similar to us, who do the same thing as us. And so that's a lot of times how the communities continue to grow. So when we look at being inclusive and we want to say something, we got to make sure that we're doing the same thing as well. So for example, we might have a run crew and we say, all runners are welcome. When we say all runners are welcome, we not take a step back and say, okay, if we're saying all runners are welcome, are we saying all runners that look like me or all runners in general? And so a lot of times it's hard, it sounds simple, but may not be easy, but understanding, of course, what are experiences that won't be similar to what I do, and how can I offer that to be inclusive? So that is very much so in that anti-racist and anti-oppressive kind of mindset, is understanding what does that look like, what does that mean, and looking beyond our unconscious bias and making sure that we can have experiences that truly are inclusive.
Absolutely. And if you happen to be called in as an organization or a crew or an event, take the criticism, listen to it, digest it, and don't get defensive. Don't be like, just like take the criticism, take a look around and see, oh, okay, how have I done this? Yeah, I totally agree. It has to be authentic. And you, checking the biases, your bias is so important.
And getting that training. And again, just to reiterate that.
Pay people for it.
The influence as well. Who's influencing these decisions? If you want to have an racist, anti-oppression kind of mindset with the policies that your organization is making, who's making these policies? So again, it's the influence that's in the room.
I'd also like to add that being called in is a gift, like instead of being defensive, someone is doing the labor, someone is educating you. So it's a gift to be called in. Let's talk about the future. What do you want to see change in the running industry that would make a meaningful impact? And what do you hope to see in the future of running in Toronto as well as globally?
Okay, I'm going to jump in. Something that I'm doing personally, so of course this means I'd like to see more of it, more surrounding me and with other runners, is again more on that sort of front facing side of who we see represented whatever in media, is just to continue seeing more body diversity, age. I want to see, you know, the 60 plusers doing cool things. You know, give me all shapes and sizes, give me all abilities. I don't think we see enough representation of para runners, and different ways people may have different abilities or disabilities and how they're getting out there. I'd love to see, you know, more of that in storytelling from various outlets. And I think too, just like slowing it down. It doesn't have, everything doesn't have to be performance based. PBs are wonderful, but give me your like best slow run on purpose, you know, tell me what you saw, what you smelled, how you felt, you know, like, I think we all as runners, we've all done it. I've done it. You get caught up of wanting to really push all the time. And I think it would be great to actually see people, you know, take it back, more of a Soulful Runs approach, you know, just like being a beginner again, and inviting new people out. You know, I think we also love running with our friends and running with people we know, but when was the last time you invited someone who wasn't a runner to just take a walk and maybe add a few jogs, you know, to that walk and try to get them involved in the sport?
Absolutely. And I will share a little context when Melissa said Soulful Runs approach. We a lot of times for our runs, we actually go on time base. So it'll be like a 30-minute run, for example. So we will
I loved that.
Versus we're doing a 5K and so we're like, I've never done a 5K before. I don't know if I can keep up with it. So that may be one example that, you know, if there are other run leaders who are on this call right now, might want to find ways to shift to have an inclusive run and for different levels and experiences in running. That could be one way to share. But one thing that I would definitely love to see, and I kind of touched on it in some of my answers, is truly normalizing Black running and recreational Black running as an average runner. So someone who can decide to go outside in old sweats and go for a run, and that is normal and that is okay. I'm going to share, be completely transparent and vulnerable in this moment with folks on the call, but I've had experiences. Sometimes I feel like I had to go outside and make sure I looked like a runner so that people knew I was a runner, even though I was running. So, and to give that concept, it's that time where, you know, how people are perceiving you when you're just simply trying to enjoy the sport. So I would love to be able to see more Black runners, more runners of color to be enjoying the run, whether it is in a group, whether it is solo. We all find ways, we all talk about, you know, the achievement that you make of going out for your first time, or we're seeing beautiful weather now and going outside and just like basking in the sun and going for a run and, you know, coming back home and having that runner's high. I think that's something that everyone should be able to enjoy. And I would love to see more runners in the Black community to be able to experience that as well on an everyday basis.
I agree, the joy of running.
I'd love to see people embrace the seasons of running. Like, I admit, when I embarked on my running journey, I was about running faster and farther and PBs. And now, at first I thought it was old age, but actually I'm seeing more and more people actually leaning into the idea of seasons. And so you can have this sort of season or time in your life where what you need is sort of like these challenges, these athletic sort of challenges to push yourself. And at other times, running is diverse enough of a sport that it can be there for the seasons when you just need to escape, when you just need to tap out, when you just need to breathe. I had a therapist once tell me that she said, in context of running, said, I feel like sometimes the only time you can breathe is when you're out of breath. And it hit me that running for me is often also just a time for me to kind of breathe. So I'd love to see people be able to appreciate how diverse the sport of running is, lean into it, and have your season, know what season you're in. Doesn't mean no more running fast. It just means like, what do you need right now? Can meet you there. I'd also love to see more young people running. I recently had someone ask me to point them in the direction of runners between the ages of 18 and 24, if you know anyone. And I was stuck. I was going through my Instagram and I'm like, people were, and also you just can't go up to people and ask them, how old are you? But my mama raised me better than that. But it was a demographic that I noticed stood out to me as being, like, where are these younger runners? You know, where are they? And so I'd love to see more young people coming into the sport.
So I love that you all touched on joy, because I think that's my last question, talking about running and racing and joy. And I just want to know from everybody, what does collective celebration, collective joy look like to you?
I'll start. In a pandemic, everyone's a solo runner. Collective joy is celebrating our wins online, regardless of how big or how small they are. I love, actually, one of the groups that that is actually online based is Chicks Run the Six, and it's actually a very inclusive group, but they celebrate online how to celebrate these wins. So I really enjoyed that. And as Black Runners of the GTA, whenever someone hashtags it, I always share someone's run, regardless of how big or small it is. And yeah, as a solo runner, connecting with other solo runners like Nadia and Nicole, and it's just simply magic. It's just celebrating it together in a pandemic, but I can't wait to do it in real time.
I think I always just try to channel good cheer squad vibes. Obviously, with pandemic especially in Ontario, you know, some of the group joy is non-existent. So similar to Melanie, a lot of it is about group chats of saying, you know, okay, what weekend can we all do something or sign up for a virtual race, and then share the photos. Everyone does their run and you give your virtual high fives, and that's been great. But, you know, I'm excited for when we can have in-person races again, and so that I can soak up cheer squad vibes, cheering all day at a marathon, because that is my jam. I come early, I stay late, and I'm screaming and clapping and running along friends as they pass by. Like, to me, joy is celebrating others, other runners' successes and celebrations. So that keeps me encouraged to keep running, because I don't really race anymore. It doesn't necessarily bring me personal joy, but I want to see it in others, and so I want to keep celebrating others doing incredible things.
I would say from my perspective, it's really showing up for one another, and just having that joy of being with another person and moving together. One thing that I miss that I'm looking forward to so much once we have in-person runs again, but a lot of times our post-run selfie, and like just having it, we're literally just celebrating that each person showed up and moved together, maybe met someone new, talked about their day, and just having that moment. I am definitely looking forward to having that, so we can just celebrate one another as a community again.
Yes, run to brunch.
Do we make holding hands and running a thing? Like, I'll do that.
After everyone's vaccinated.
Yeah, well, I want to get to that point.
Is there anything else you want to add, Quinton?
No, I think you guys touched on. I mean, I think most of the runners that I know miss running in groups, miss that connection, miss that sort of community vibe. I've been blown away by how creative the running community's been at finding ways to stick together through this, doing things like, you know, like all the things that we've talked about. Like, the running community's still shown up. We're still out there. We're still stomping around, and whatever restrictions they throw at us, we find a way to like meet them, but still connect. Social media helps. Also, runners are just stubborn MFs, you know, like, we're out there, we're going to find a way to move. but I think we're missing that connection. So I'm looking forward to that. And I'd love to just see people really just like I said, hold hands. No bikes can cross on the MBT. It's just all of us.
One thing I'll quickly add that I was just reminded of, because you were talking about trail running earlier, and I also love being on the trails, and that I found, nature in general has always been a place for me to go to get grounded and breathe and connect back to myself. But especially in this past year, I think finding, whether it's an urban trail, paved, gravel trail, or you're able to get out, in the middle of a forest, that's brought me a ton of joy this past year, is just, again, kind of slowing it down and running in a different environment and just like smelling all the smells, listening to whether it's the birds or the trees, and just like connecting to my senses in a different way, to just get out of the city. Because for me, I live right in the heart of Toronto, so in my neighborhood it's just traffic and noise and pedestrians, so it's been nice to switch up the location. So for anyone who's able, I definitely suggest, if you're looking for new ways to infuse some joy into your runs, is just switch it up as best you can, and what's safe and possible where you are.
I also want to say to Quinton's point about people being creative in the running community, even a conversation like this tonight, we're coming together, we're having conversations about running, and this is joyful too.
It is. I love it. I love it. Also, we do that for Project Love Runs, just being creative. We run, set our intention, and then we meet online, and then we build community that way. So community is still not canceled. Even in a pandemic, we can still meet and we can still gather. We can still have these conversations.
Melanie, do you want to talk a little bit about the upcoming run or the upcoming conversation on the weekend that you have planned?
It's more of a seminar. It's taking a different direction, and it has 2 speakers. I would encourage everyone to go onto the website and take a look, and if they can participate. It's about infertility, so I'm looking forward to it.
Perfect. So we have a little bit of time for Q&A. So I'm just going to remind, if people have questions, they can drop it into the chat. We have one, I don't have the name, but the person says, in your opinion, how can CRS make their space more inclusive, and how can they assure that the population is well represented and welcomed in their events?
I could jump in. One of the things that I've seen some race directors do is incorporate, pacers, right, or ambassadors for their runs. Pride Run has done an amazing job this year of like bringing together ambassadors that are already out in the community, and that's a good way of just sort of taking a step back and looking at a group of people that can sort of represent the races or the spaces that you're doing. So that could be an area where they look to look for ambassadors, people that are already in the community, and can bring new faces and vibes to the events that they're doing.
Very true. I am a Canadian Canada Running Series ambassador. I just wanted to put that out there, and just that racing and to challenge yourself, it's always an option, especially in a pandemic, that you can do it virtually.
Yeah, and I think, all the things we touched on earlier, when it comes to who they're hiring, perhaps reaching out for land acknowledgements. I know with CRS, like I'll use the example of Scotiabank Marathon Weekend, usually you'll have the big trade show area. You can have things like this. We may be doing live, they have different panel chats where they're inviting runners to come and speaking engagements. That's also a way that I think they've done an okay job in the past of inviting different people to come up and speak about their experiences, and going back to that sort of front facing aspect. Again, just when you've got the photographers on the road that are taking all your race shots, and what populates their website, what populates their Instagram page of showcasing. Because I'll tell you, when, you know, if anyone who's on here, I mean, I feel like everyone's probably a runner who's watching the webinar, but if you've never gone to watch a marathon, it's the one thing I recommend everyone do at least once in their life, because you really do get to see a cross section of population who are putting it out there for a half marathon and marathon distance, and people that you might not, you know, get to interact with on a day-to-day basis. But it's amazing who you see lacing up and putting it on out there. So it's just a matter of getting that shown to the greater, you know, to the greater population, to say, hey, yeah, look at all these incredible folks who are running.
I would add that it's also super important to have representation across different levels. So of course, you know, the people that you see when you show up to the race, you know, having representation there, and who's, for example, you're checking in, receiving your things, lining you up. When there's representation in that space and you see yourself, of course, you're going to feel a little more comfortable because you now feel seen in the space. And I'm sure, I know the first time I did a road race, I was so nervous. And so just like those things where I'm like, I feel like I was like, am I supposed to be here? How does that feel like? But then also look at, you know, at the administrative level of like, how is there diversity in that element? Because I think when we have that representation, we also have diversity in thought. So I know I've mentioned it before with like making sure that we have it where you're creating something with someone in mind versus just simply saying that you're welcome. And so when we have more diversity in thought, we're able to actually create that in a more purposeful way. So I think that's something that Canadian Running Series can do, is really have that representation at different levels on executions.
For sure. And continuing on, because again, I think a lot of our themes loop back, something all of us and everyone watching can also do to help is volunteer. A lot of these races rely on volunteers for all of these things, people to hand out medals, people to usher you here and there. And so if we're not giving back to our own, you know, communities, to the events we run and participate in, then again, think about those runners. Like Ekua said, she showed up, and it's like, okay, what if it's your first race? Well, if you want to help out, then volunteer at races and get involved. You know, I'm sure lots of organizations have volunteer, like if there's, you know, board positions. I think that's probably a big area that race organizations can improve on, is having diverse faces, diversity of thought on that level, just like Ekua said. So look out for positions that might open up if that's something that interests you.
So I have a question from Pedro. What are your current run focuses / goals? And do you have a favorite run route or destination?
I can answer that. I actually was trying to get, because I'm a solo runner, I have my coach, Heather, awesome human being who gives me my plan and stuff like that. And I'm training to run a half marathon. And I felt like also my favorite run routes are in Scarborough. It's on the waterfront. And I feel like that's something that can have more access to if we build as a community and share that knowledge of run routes and where we can meet up, and try to have like a community base where we're trying to find runners to run with, even for short distances when we can, because right now we're running solo. So I just wanted to say that.
Anybody else?
I'll share. My favorite routes are flat. I like to run throughout the city. A lot of times when I see a hill, I'm like, okay, you know, mentally prepare myself to just drive all the way up to it. But I love exploring the city. So sometimes, you know, I'll go to different areas, whether I've also lived in different parts of the city. So sometimes I'd like to even just like run to destination. So sometimes I'd have it where I'd like run to my mom's place and then find my way back, or go to a different place that way. So I love exploring in that element. In terms of goals, I actually had my ultimate goal that I completed in December when it came to running, and I ran my first marathon. I would love to be able to run a marathon in like a race setting. So that'll still be on my bucket list. When that'll happen, we'll find out. But for now, it's really just getting back into being consistent with running and to run faster 5Ks at this point, because I realized that running long distance is hard. And so I've just shifted in that perspective, but absolutely love exploring the cities with different routes.
I'll jump in real quick. I love mixing it up. I love running. I love the lakeshore. I love seeing the city just to my side, left and right. But I also love running out in trails and getting out of the city. Right now I got a running goal. I'm running my first trail ultra this spring. So I don't know, I just had a pandemic moment and agreed to do it. So now I've just got to pull it off. And then hopefully by the summer, we'll have a new idea of what our running landscape looks like, and I'll throw some goals out for the fall.
Fingers crossed. This is from Claire. She says, I wholeheartedly agree with paying people, especially BIPOC folks, for their time to share their knowledge and educate others. Many run crews and clubs are free and have no budget for training or anything. Do you have any suggestions of how to work around this?
Maybe a fundraiser? Sorry, Melissa.
Yeah, no, I was going to say, yeah, I mean, it could just be a pool your resources, because, you know, I can understand with, if it's, you know, a local run crew not being an official organization with money, but if it's something you're leading, what value do you put on it? What importance? You know, it all depends. If you're not in that financial position, then maybe it's something you discuss with members saying, hey, this is something we'd love to do. Who can, you know, pool resources, or like Melanie said, maybe it becomes a fundraising effort. And I'm sure with a little research, you know, there might be some great things you can find online to at least get you started. Workshops that may not be like that are already pre-recorded, that, you know, you pay like a flat fee versus paying a consultancy fee to have a person come and provide this, you know, like a tailored workshop for you. So those might be some options.
I would
leverage your community.
Yeah, I was gonna say with that community element that you may find, or the other organizations that are aligned to the same goals that you're trying to achieve, and potentially could be a way that they can help support you. So for example, if there's a nonprofit that is able to facilitate that, and you know, you're joining with their community, have that training. I'll share an example with Soleful Runs in October. We're doing the virtual marathon relay, the Scotiabank relay. And so for us, want to be able to make it more accessible for folks who are probably doing their first race. And in a way, some people might think about $50 for a virtual run may not seem accessible at a time for some people. So I was looking to find ways to help reduce that barrier. So I actually connected with another nonprofit organization to ask if they could help support us by subsidizing the fee for athletes. And that was one way that it aligned to what they were doing. They were really trying to support Black community and activities. And so they were also able to help us because we aligned in our goals and worked on initiative together. So that might be a way if there's any organizations that are in your community that you can connect with.
And I just want to add on, I don't know how many people know that CRS, when you go into their website, they actually have a grant program for raising bibs. They call it for marginalized people, but I think we should try to normalize Blackness not always being equated to poverty. Maybe they can open it up to anyone who wants to try racing for the first time as a BIPOC individual, or maybe just open it up to, let's say, who's a mentor for BIPOC individuals, BIPOC children, and just try to get racing bibs that way in order to give them to the community instead of CRS giving it to the actual individual that they seem or deem fit. I just wanted to add on.
I mean, all in all too, and maybe this lines up with what everyone here is saying, is don't be afraid to ask, you know, reach out, ask, and you'd be surprised how resourceful our running community can be in sharing the sport. We don't want people left out. So I think collectively we'll find a way to make sure that everyone can participate in some way, shape, or form. If a space doesn't exist or isn't accessible, we'll create one that is.
Sounds good. So this question is from PPRC founder Trine. Sorry if I mispronounced your name. They say, I identify as BIPOC living in small town in Durham region. What are your suggestions on moving with inclusion when your BIPOC circle is very small?
I'd say quality over quantity. Hold your peeps tight. You don't need a lot of people to have a really awesome run crew. So whoever you've got, the people that are interested, have a good time and do well with what you've got. You'd be surprised how many people will come out of the woodworks when they see something really special happening. That'd be my.
And the same thing, just bring your authentic self, put forth what your intention is for the group, and just, yeah, when it starts small, if it's something that you want to grow, you know, people will follow. The more, you just got to show up consistently, and spread the word, and hopefully you tell a friend to tell a friend. And you know, I do feel like in those small neighborhoods, if people start seeing you going around the sort of the same routes, people be looking out their windows, people be on their front porch like, what is this? And just, you know, start, you know, giving the Ekua thumbs up when you run by people.
I know people who drive or take the subway across town to run with a group. Like, I know people that do that because the energy and the vibes in that group are so special that they don't want to miss it. So every week they make a trip to be there. So yeah, if you build it, they'll come.
And then this question is from Mohammed Basat. What is your response when people say running is for running? Why do we have to make it about ARAO? So anti-racist, anti-oppression. He's curious about your responses or your approaches, sorry.
I'll chime in. I think that it has to be anti-racist, anti-oppressive because we are people, and because those are like people issues within our society that we have to keep on addressing it as well. We can't separate ourselves as people when we move and when we decide to take on the sport. And so it also does carry with us because, you know, it's still going to be a part of that experience. So absolutely, I know a lot of times that comes up where it's, why does it always have to be about race? And it's because we are people.
We don't get to leave this at home, whether we're running or not running. So, you know, it's one of those, like, if white people are exhausted hearing about it, imagine how we are living with it.
Yeah, like running's not for running, running's for runners. And we are people, like I said, so you can't take that piece out of it.
And this is from Annie. It's sort of similar to what you were talking about with the small towns. She says, I am new to my town and all of the run clubs lack diversity. I struggle with finding effective and appropriate ways to reach out to the broader BIPOC community if those connections are not yet in place, especially in trail running. Any thoughts on building brand new connections?
Well, after this, in conclusion, for our inclusion discussion, the Black Runners of the GTA will be launching their website on Black Runners, www.blackrunners.net, and you can go there. And my hope and my goal is that you'll be able to, when we can run together, be able to find a buddy within a small town. Like, if you just put it out there, this is my Instagram handle, you know, let's connect this way, in that sense. Or if you were looking for a run group that follows what you're looking for, you'll be able to find it. So that's it.
Quinton, did you have
And
something?
or
Melissa?
Sorry. I mean, this may be oversimplifying, but I think in the same sense of, like, as long as you're authentic, sometimes it's about the invitation. There might just finding that one person, and just building, you know, that duo where, okay, if you want to get out and trail run, if you're with a group or if you're just on your own, you know, just saying, hey, I was thinking about trying this. And if they're not keen to run, just start by, let's just go for a trail walk. Let's just see where it goes, whether it's coworker, someone, you know, finding other elements in your town, you know, again, via social media, like if there's other groups, meetup.com, I don't know, does that still exist? Might be dating myself. But I would say, I think it can just be something very simple of we all have to kind of be vulnerable. It's hard to make friends sometimes as adults, but you just have to like put out that invitation and just ask someone to come run with you and see where it goes.
I'm big on energy, and I think, you know, I think there is definitely a push for people to like take a look and accountability of their spaces and think about ways that they could make it look more diverse and make it more inclusive. But I think if the energy is right, I think if you're genuinely showing up in those spaces and celebrating people's differences when they come, you're going to create a space that people will be drawn to, regardless of size, color, speed, and all of that. Right? The energy that you're putting out is what the energy you're going to attract. So I just feel like it's always good to just start with that. Like, what's your purpose? What's your vibe? And then the tribe will come.
And I think, you know, I mentioned this before, but in the sense of if you're, you know, looking to invite people to come and join you, whether it's as in a group setting or one-on-one, is you know, using the power of social media of even in the things you share. Because I do find, you know, as we kind of scroll through, like whether it's Facebook, Instagram, Twitter, the stories, if you're sharing other people's stories of saying, oh wow, here's something cool I saw that a runner's doing, and if that looks and if that's like a diverse and inclusive group, people will see that and be like, oh, you're sharing some, oh, this is what you're interested in, oh, maybe we can connect, and see if that works for you. Because I've definitely found that sometimes, you know, people surprise me of that I didn't think had similar interests of me until I start seeing them share things, and then it's like, then you just drop that, slide into the DMs.
I think that that's it for our questions. So I don't know. I'm just going to leave it open if anybody has any final thoughts. Otherwise, we'll just wrap up.
I just want to say thank you, Melanie, for organizing all this, and Michelle for moderating. It was awesome.
Yeah, thank you guys so much for this space. Very needed and very appreciated.
I also add to thank you to everyone who tuned in and listened and seeing the interaction in the chat. I think it's also super, super amazing to see the number of people who joined in to be a part of the conversation. I do hope in better times we can all, of course, be in a space together, run together, but also really great to see a number of people who are open to having this conversation so that we can create a better future in the Toronto running community.
I just want to say thank you guys for all attending, for agreeing, and just much love. Thank you.
Thank you, everybody. Thank you, Kelly from CRS, for handling all of the tech stuff. Thank you to all of our panelists, Quinton, Melanie, Ekua, Melissa. Thank you to everybody for tuning in. I hope that this pandemic is over soon so we can get together. And until then, everybody stay safe.
See you guys. Thank you.
Bye.
Bye, guys.